different platforms, right? This is definitely something that people might be able to be interested in and be able to kind of take advantage of these different mediums in order to get your word out. All right, so when you're looking at, the 12 rule, one of the first things that you really have to look at or understand is about etiquette. All right, so when you look at etiquette, essentially the way that I kind of plant this or kind of try to visualize this is that if you're looking at a camera or if you're looking at a phone, essentially that camera or the microphone is essentially your earth, right? And you as a moon or its moon, you essentially always revolve around what that earth is doing, right? So that means that no matter where I move, I'm always going to keep, try to keep eye contact with you and the camera. Or if you are, have a microphone, right, like the gentleman has in our group right here, essentially whenever, depending on what type of microphone it is, basically some microphones are very distinct in terms of, they're unidirectional or they're omnidirectional. So, or sometimes, depending on what kind of microphone it is, they only might be able to get the biggest or the best, feedback or the best input from one side of the microphone or the other, right? So you just have to make sure that you are essentially making the best contact to make it the best experience so that it's very clear and concise when you are actually creating your content. All right, so the next portion goes into the concept. All right, so now that you know that you've had the idea and now you're saying, you know what, I'm going to create content. I'm going to create a vlog or I'm going to create, a podcast. And now more than ever, it's the perfect time to do this, especially since we're very restricted in terms of how we can interact with each other, right? But, similar to, I would assume that, everyone has different types of client base, right? And for the most part, now we're getting into the place where millennials and zennials, right, are starting to be our main sources of, clientele, right? So a lot of those times, like you always hear that, millennials want to know what is the social responsibility of a company that they work with or someone that they buy from before they actually make a purchase. So the best way to kind of really hone this in is understanding the concept, right? And so with, the 12 rule, of course, you have like that first initial piece with the etiquette. The next piece is about in terms of how you develop that concept. And what I did is that we developed a 12-point essentially system that you should actually kind of look at in order to basically create the perfect concept. And ultimately, like what they really kind of stem from is the who, what, when, where, how, and of course the why. Right. So the way you kind of looking at this, of course, the way that from what you're seeing, the why is the most important piece. Right. So the thing is, that is essentially your compass in terms of how you're going to create your content. Right. And especially when it comes to looking at your business, right, you have to be able to make sure that essentially your content that you'll be creating is essentially an extension of yourself and an extension of what your business represents. So, for me personally, like my why, for me personally, is that I want to give away my MBA education, right? And essentially how I want to do that is essentially creating different tools and in services to be able to help small businesses and entrepreneurs, essentially help them level the playing field against these, not necessarily against larger corporations, but, we all have the same problems, especially if you are a huge conglomerate versus someone who's starting out on a solo on your own. All right. So some of the other things that you want to make sure that you look at is what your objective is. What do you want people to take away from your actual content itself? Right. And then when you look at the who is, of course, it's like who you are and who's your demo, right? You'll hear people mention the word avatar all the time. Essentially what an avatar is essentially what a representation of what your your ideal customer, who that person is, right? So for me personally, I have five avatars that essentially that represent the different types of people that I want to work with here at the OPIN Media Lab and with Open Interactive. All right, and then when you look at the what, of course, you want to talk about what your passions and your experiences are. And essentially what this is really the main source of the value that you are going to provide to your end user. So the person who's going to actually consume it, right? So a lot of times what I usually kind of push for people is that I typically try to give people hey, like provide 90% of what, essentially people would essentially pay for, right? Provide it for them for free, right? Because for the most times when you create content and you provide things for free, right? A lot of those times, like you can give people the information, right? And most times they don't actually follow through with it, right? What might happen is that they might, you give them the information, they have the information that they need to know, and they realize that, you know what, I don't have the time to do this on my own, right? So, what might happen is that someone might say, you know what, you provided me so much value, ahead of time in order to kind of get my space into the right, create my content in the right place, that, hey, I actually want to work with you because I know that you essentially like understand what my plight is, right? And then going into, future stuff, you want to look at your wins in terms of your frequency. Is it going to be daily? Is it going to be weekly, bi-weekly, monthly? All right. Typically, I try to promote that you should try to create content that's weekly, right? And there's different things to kind of help you get from week to week from when you release things, right? And then also, if you're going to use guests, of course, using guests is something that's very, very important. That's something that, can be a double-edged sword, right? Because like I've even dealt with this personally where I had my podcast and it really relied on guests. And what I've come to realize was that it was never really about the value that I could provide people, but it was always about pushing the value that other people can provide my audience. And what I realized is that people aren't coming to, your show or to your podcast or your vlog in order to find out what the other person is doing. They came there for you, right? And, you might be able to, kind of siphon off some of their fan base when they come to listen, but you have to be very, very strategic in how you do those things, right? And of course, the where and the how, about terms of how you want to consume content, and how, of course, is how if you want them to consume it. Do you want them to be audio based? Do you want it to be visual? Do you want it to be only on social? Or do you want to document versus curate, which is something we'll cover later on today. All right, so introductions very quickly. When you're creating your introduction for your actual content, these are the three pieces that have to, you have to kind of take into account in order to make it a very valid and very, impactful introduction, right? So you have to be very captivating, right? You have to be expressive, and it has to be repetitive, right? And then when I say repetitive, that means that so every single time that you do a different show, it's going to always be someone's first time, or you always have to assume it's going to be someone's first time. So when it's something that's very, captivating and expressive and repetitive, it's something that people will remember, right? And it's something that, all right, like I know exactly what I'm going to get into and what I'm going to get out of this by the end of it. All right, so ultimately something that you want to kind of keep in mind once you're looking at this and understanding the 12 rule is what's your hook, right? What is going to get someone's attention? What is going to, before they can even press play on your content, like what is going to essentially capture their attention to keep them in the fold and to keep them going? All right, so now that takes us, into the, some 5 important tips for your introduction. Of course, you want to talk about who you are, and your name and a brief fact. So you say, hey, my name is EA Green, and I am the CEO of OPIN Interactive, right? That's very quick and very concise. We want to talk about what your content is about or what your podcast is about, so that, again, understanding that it's someone's first time, you want to make sure that they know what they're getting themselves into ahead of time, right? So that they can make the decision to say, yes, you know what, I'm going to keep going, right? Always want to tell people where they can find the information. So that's your website, your social pages, all right? And then when they can expect, episodes or expect the next entry of what that vlog is, right? So typically, when it comes to, depending on what you're looking at, I say between Mondays and Wednesdays are typically the best days of the week to release, right? Because people are in that train of thought. And then you also have to understand that when you think about how you want people to consume it, you have to give them, put it in that particular time of the day and so forth. So for me, with my podcast, I wanted people to listen to it, to and from work, because the average commute time is about 30 minutes, right? So I always released it at Monday at 6 a.m. so that no matter what, hopefully, it's the beginning of the week, it was some type of motivation that you needed, and it was there for you to take advantage of. And then of course, the last piece is your thank you or your call to action. What's gonna, what do you have to tell them what to do next after they pay attention, or after they start going into your actual content. All right, the next piece is the formula, which is considered for formats and topics. All right, so when we look at this here, essentially, your content format can come in one of two spaces, right? It can come in as a podcast, which is audio, or just straight up video. But for us, when we talk about it a little bit later, is that, if you look at the, to try to boil it down and very, very simple, you can create a video, right? And then strip the audio from that video, and then it becomes a a podcast, right? So think about it that way, right? A podcast, all that is just audio that you can listen to on the internet, right? So there's no special way, or there's no only one way that you can actually get it done. It's all about, how you actually present it and how you actually execute on that episode. So for me, what I typically do, especially when there's a visual component, and I normally would, record sessions, is that what I would do is I would, take this video of me talking to you guys, and I can essentially just take the video out and upload the audio, and it's a complete, a complete podcast episode without any other work that needs to be done. Right, and that really kind of goes into what micro content is when we talk about it a little later. All right, so when you look at your formats, these are some different formats that you can, put your actual content in. You can, put it in an interview style. You can do as an ongoing, or you can create seasons. There's also things like variety shows, similar to like how you might see like a late night show. If things are Q&A, or if you're going to cover a topic. Right, and I purposely kind of overlook the hybrid, because depending on the situation, depending on who is going to be listening to you, providing a hybrid, or basically a mixture of different types, essentially will kind of allow your potential clients, or your potential end users or listeners or viewers, to essentially be able to not get bored with what you're providing them, right? So this also kind of gives you a cop out for, if that if you are, cover a certain topic that might be, particularly heavy, or, or you might have someone who's an interviewer, right? It allows you to kind of like be able to switch different things up so that, you can provide the best experience possible. So essentially some things that, you want to look at why formats are important is essentially it allows you to show like what's in it for your audience, right? So, if you are a, let's say, for instance, essentially, I'm gonna pick on Mona, because I seen Mona was in here earlier, right? So for Mona, like, I would advise something of the sort, like a hybrid of sorts, to where, it might necessarily be like a topic where she might cover, to particular topics of design, right, and cover the whole thing in that particular episode. But then where it would be a hybrid is that I could see that she might bring in some people that, that she's worked with, in the past, and she's had the experience and, being in this industry and understanding, what it means to be a designer and, in her field, where, having a audience, an interview with a guest might essentially provide some more value on top of the value she's already kind of pushing, moving into that. Right. And also when you look at your format, it really helps you look at what makes you unique. Right. And it also showcases your strengths. So you always want to pick a format that's going to put you in the best light, to really be able to show off what your experiences are, and essentially what ultimately is what your value that you provide. All right. So I'm sorry, Mona, go ahead.
I said, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Excuse me. All right. So when you look at the format, right, typically I essentially, after doing tons of research, and how you do research and content is just by watching and listening to tons of content, right? And you look at the people who are the most popular in their space, and you really kind of notice trends, right? So these are different things that I've practiced and I've tweaked and put into use. And this format that you see here, if you can take a screenshot of this, is probably the perfect thing for you to take away, if anything, from this, is how to essentially format your actual content if you're going to talk about it, right? So literally, most content has most of these things, like most of these pieces in here, no matter what it is, right? If that means if it's a clip that is 15, well, let's say 15 seconds, but like 60 seconds on Facebook or Instagram, or if it's an hour-long podcast, or if it's a half-hour vlog, right? So, basically to kind of cover through it, depending on how you're trying to set up your content, you might have ads, right? And typically ads go into two places. Essentially ads can go anywhere in your content, but typically you want to either have it as a pre-roll ad or as a mid-roll ad. Essentially what that means is that a pre-roll ad is essentially just happens right before any other the content actually takes place, right? And if you are in a place where you want to monetize your content, or you have it to be self-sustaining, so you might get sponsors and things of that nature, right? A pre-roll ad, typically you can charge more for those spaces, because that is where the majority of the viewers will be, right? So if it's going to happen before even the content even starts, or very, very in the beginning, within the first couple of minutes, right, having that pre-roll ad is a perfect place for that to kind of go, right? And then moving forward, you have your introduction, and then what's your overview. Essentially, the overview is right after the introduction, after people know who you are and what you're talking about, letting them know what is going to be the essentially what you plan, the journey you're planning on taking them through for that next, couple of minutes to an hour that you're actually creating something. And then after that, if you have a guest, it's probably the perfect time, or after you do your overview, is to introduce your guest, which then allows you to go into your topic or your theme, right? And what I typically try to push and preach is that to really go on a non-hot topic, dependent conversation, right? So hot topic is basically whatever is trending in the moment. And the reason why I suggest not doing that, right, is that basically when you create things that are using hot topics, it essentially dates your actual content, right? So, in that moment, basically it does, right after that moment, it becomes irrelevant, essentially, because that moment has passed, right? But that does not mean that you cannot use something as a hot topic, or something that is that theme or that hot topic as support of what you're trying to convey, right? So I always try to tell people, like, use, things that are trendy as a way to almost kind of like that second or third paragraph in that essay, rather than it being the topic of your essay altogether, right? And then at the end, of course, you have your wrap up and your wind down. So typically what takes place, after you have your topic, your theme, you can either introduce that mid-roll ad or that break, or a break. Typically, I tell people to take a break, or give your audience, say, hey, we'll be right back, and take a break. Is that what that allows people to do, is to actually give them a moment to consume and to understand what you just said, right? To just take it all in, to just kind of be able to process it. If they need to take a break and pause it, they can go, use the bathroom, or, continue cleaning, or whatever they needed to do, right? And then they can pick up on their own leisure, right? And then when you look at your wrap up or your wind down, typically what I do is I tell my clients to essentially switch it up, right? This is where that variety comes in, that hybrid comes in most times, where I tell people, like, find a different way to essentially end it on a higher note, right? So, and it not necessarily can be funny, it can be just enlightening. There's something that's going to just change the way the flow is after someone's been listening to something in the same cadence for however long it might be. And of course, the last piece is your outro or your sign off. So that is just as important as your introduction, right? Especially if someone makes it to the end of your content, you have to make sure you thank them. You have to make sure you give them that call to action to make sure they know that they need to come back the next time, right? And then where they can learn more about you, or where they can go back to find out more, more content from you. All right. So when you look at your theme versus your topic, essentially a theme, way I look at it is that theme is the general direction that you want to go, right? And your topic is very, very like, I guess you would say, very, I guess, concise. So essentially, the way I just kind of looking at it is just like, hey, happiness is in this general direction, right? Or when you're at the mall, right, you see those signs that kind of hang up overhead. They kind of just tell you, hey, the food court is just in this direction. If you just keep going, you'll get there somehow, right? But where someone has a topic that's essentially is very, very descriptive and is very, very, like, you understand exactly what that is, right? And this is something that you definitely need to take into account, because when you look at your theme versus your topic, if you don't pay attention, or if you overlook it, you might essentially run out of things to talk about if you keep pushing things as themes rather things as topics, right? So when you look at your topics, some things to take into account is, your prioritization, right? So essentially, if you look at your content as if it was a movie or if it was a series, right? So you never want to give the good stuff at the very, very beginning or the very, very end, right? You have to kind of try to create that, almost that wave that really kind of helps build up the momentum and then gives people the payoff and then take them down, right? So when you prioritize the things you look at is, does it require research, right? Does it require, so if you need to go back to make sure that you're well informed about the subject versus something that you can just provide your opinion on, right? You want to look at your relevancy. Again, with hot topics, I suggest that you don't make your topic something that is very, very trendy, and you just use it as a way to like find out what the underlying theme is for that hot topic, so you can provide that context so that you can use the hot topic as a support rather than the content of itself. All right, and then when you look at sequencing, is essentially along with the prioritization in terms of like, how do you sequence it and to make sure that you can kind of like take people on a journey throughout this whole thing. And then the last piece is storyboarding, which allows you to storyboard your actual episodes by, as they happen. All right. So again, now we're at the third portion, which is called dots, right? So dots for short. And, I'm not gonna have a potty mouth this early in the morning, but it basically means don't overthink stuff. All right. So successful execution through action. Essentially, now that you have your theme, now that you have your concept and you know what you're going to talk about and you know how you're going to structure it, now it's time to actually get it done, right? So now this is the time where you need to actually, start recording stuff. You need to start, recording video, making sure your lighting is good, making sure your audio is good in order to move forward, right? So when you look at actually executing on your concept and your theme, right, and your topics, essentially these are things that you need to look at as elements of that great story. All right, you as a person who is creating content, you are now a storyteller, right? And it is about providing ways to provide as much value as you can, so that when you finally make the ask as a business owner, right, now it feels like you're not the shaky car salesman that it's hounding you as soon as you get on the car lot. Now, you've built some rapport, you've built some credibility with your listener or your viewer, and then now you're able to essentially make that ask. So some things to look at, of course, you want to make sure you're grabbing their attention. You set the mood, right? You want to make sure that people understand what they're getting themselves into, right? And you can do that in different ways in terms of doing like, kind of leading, you see movies where you kind of give off what the ending is and you work your way backwards by how you get there. This is different things that you can take into account to really kind of help sell your story. And of course, if you can help it, right, depending on the theme and the concept of your, of your podcast, try to use casual and everyday words, right? So typically, if it's something, if that your podcast is meant to empower people who, do not, empower minorities for financial literacy, you might not use, or you might use like some of these correct terms or the regular terms, but you might be intentional and making sure that you provide the definitions for them afterwards, right? Or if you have, an audience that are doctors or lawyers in terms of like how to create a successful practice, maybe you can use the jargon in those different places so that people just understand it. So it's really about who understanding the concept in the beginning, about who your audience is, how you should determine how to move forward. All right. So essentially there are 3 parts, and you can kind of overlay the timeline that I gave you for the format, right? Essentially is the structure of a great story, right? So essentially it's based off an article that I found, right? Essentially there's 3 parts, right? So you want to use the setup, which is the beginning. You want to establish the setting, introduce the listener to what they're getting into. The confrontation is essentially what I determined was the main topic of discussion, right? And then you essentially want to have a payoff in the resolution, right? So you want to understand like what is the payoff, what is going to be the actual, you want to make sure you don't leave people with a cliffhanger. You want to make sure that you can actually button it up and drive it home, right? So that people understand like, yes, you know what, it is perfect for me to invest my time in this content that, on wherever it is, in order to, take the most out of it. All right. So again, I kind of place this here so you can kind of see how they kind of like overlap and how you can literally kind of put one over the other and see where those things are. All right. Okay. All right. So when you have you're actually executing on your content and you're going to be providing these, this conversation, right? So when you're looking at going through the format formula and taking you through that timeline for your content, basically what helps you get you from place to place is, basically segways, right? So segways is your, like the joints that connect you from one piece of your content to the other, right? So when you are, when you have a podcast and when you have a vlog, you have to make sure that you are able to just make the journey as smooth as possible, right? Because the thing is, I mean, we all know that, it's already been proven that humans have, a attention span that's smaller or, less than a goldfish now. So, essentially what might happen is that someone might lose, they might lose them for a moment, but you want to make sure that you can find ways to kind of like segue through different portions of the topic so that it's just very smooth and just very, it's like a very smooth journey throughout the whole thing. Right. And these are something that is very, very important, especially when you have a guest, right? This is something that, segues are what's really going to help you. So whenever you have a guest, you have to understand that you, the host, or whoever's the host of your content, they are what we consider the A mic, right? This is the person that is going to be in the driver's seat, taking you through the whole journey, right? And if there's a guest, you have to make sure that the guest, you want to give them time to be able to speak. But sometimes, people, they stream away off the highway, right? And you got to have that segue that's going to bring you back into your proper lane so you can keep moving forward. So the best things that help you travel from topic to topic, are using examples, right? Using your personal experience, and it kind of goes into the personal insight of how to really kind of connect it from one portion of your discussion to the next. If you are using video, providing visuals, I'll also help you, or painting a visual, in terms of, using your voice of understanding and being very descriptive, really kind of helps people move, from topic to topic as well, right? Or you can be very intentional and take a break. And that's where I mentioned with the format formula is that when you take a break at that mid-roll piece, it gives people time to digest what you just told them, right? And the way I use this is after I took a break, what we did is I kind of create like a review of what we talked about, for the previous 20 minutes of the conversation, so that if anything, like you knew exactly what I wanted you to take away from the discussion. All right, and then the last piece is doing active listening. So active listening essentially is when you have your guest. Excuse me. Yes, please let me know if you have any questions. You can unmute yourself if you need to ask anything. All right. So with active listening, the best piece or what the best advice again is when you have a guest or when you have a co-host, right? Is essentially knowing if you know where you need to go and you basically are traveling in the moment of where you are. Essentially, when you use active listening, you can find a way to connect the dots, right? And essentially, what that kind of does is like you interject, politely, not necessarily say, "Hey, excuse me, let me change the subject here." But you can find a way to input, make some input that then takes you into the next portion of the conversation, right? And that's usually like the best way. It does take a while to really get used to it, or to get, become really good at it. But that is essentially the smoothest way to really kind of move forward.
Eric, I have a question.
Sure, Rick.
So if you are doing this live you're interviewing someone, and then you're wanting to like strip the audio later to make it a podcast. Like I do this by video, and then I want to strip it later to make it this break that you're talking about. Is that something then that you would just edit in later, like in post interview?
Yes.
In other words, you wouldn't stop your interviewer and say, "Okay, let's take a break while I talk about what I have to sell."
No. So typically what that happens, so like let's say if me and you're having an interview, Rick, right? So we're talking about podcasting and we're going through it, and I go, I'm taking you through the execution of how to execute a podcast or execute a vlog, right? So as the host, what I'll do is that, hey, like we talked about a lot just now, right? So what I would kind of say to the listener is like, hey, like we finished our point and we buttoned up what the discussion was, because you either made your final point, and I'm like I'm feeling it out, right? Because I'm realizing, again, even with the time and what I want, how long I want the content to be, I realize that we're now starting to spin our wheels. So typically what I normally do is I say, hey, you know what, that was, a great discussion, Rick, and that was a really good question. But, hey, listeners, let's take a quick break and we will be right back with our final thoughts on the conversation, right? So what I normally do with that is then, from the recording standpoint, so from behind the scenes, my guests, we're still here, right? We're just taking a moment, right, to just kind of like, all right, gather our thoughts of what the final pieces of the show is. So for my podcast, it's like, look, I'm going to take you through the recap portion of my podcast, where I'm going to ask you to give some practical advice, right? And then now, once this is all over and we finish the actual recording, when you go into post-production, when you start to edit, I then cut out, essentially right after the moment I say, let's take a break. And then when I say, hey, we're back, and then what I normally do is I put a nice little sound effect that shows, that just keeps it busy for that 2 to 3 seconds, right? And then I come back to finish the actual conversation. Does that make sense, Rick?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So typically, even so when you make that break, right? The way that I look at it again is, you typically in that portion, you can either use a sound effect to, transfer you from one portion to the other, or you can actually place a mid-roll ad, right? Or, when you say ad, it can be something that you want to, plant in for yourself, or if you want to give your guests the time to really kind of plug something. But of course, you give them time to plug things at the end as well. So literally that moment, you can make it whatever you want. It's just, I believe it's just like, providing a break of some sort, even if you have nothing to say in there and it's just a sound effect, just gives the listener or the viewer that moment to just process what was just talked about. Okay. All right. So the next portion, and we're about to wrap up, right, is essentially what you need, right? So these are just some different things that you can use to actually execute the actual podcast or the vlog, right? So when you look at it, essentially some equipment that you can use is like your computer, your phone, your microphone, headphones, audio interface, which is typically your, garage bands, your Adobe Auditions, your Audacity. So these different programs that allow you to record the actual audio if you need to do that. Or, typically when you have your phone, you have other video editing software that you can use as well, right? Typically, you do not need a mixer. Now most microphones have USB microphones that allow you to kind of like use that. But if you have multiple guests, most times you need a mixer, right? Of course, you have your one thing that people don't realize is that whenever you have a podcast, right, and you want to be able to distribute it, you don't upload it to places like Spotify or Apple or Google Play directly. What happens is that you have to place your audio file onto what they call a podcasting hosting site, right? And then when you place it on that hosting site, what then allows you to do is when you create your account with these other major players, you then have your RSS feed, basically that feed that shows, hey, take it from point A and give it to Apple. When you point it to that place, it then allows it to then pull it from wherever your host is, and then allow the end user to listen to it wherever they're at. All right, and typically it's just an easier way to just make sure that it's less heavy on the on them in the background, right? Rather than just helping people stream it straight through, right? So different podcast hosting sites are things like SoundCloud is a very, very popular one. You have things like I use one called transistor.fm. There are other, like so something like SoundCloud in particular, even though a lot of people go there to listen to different pieces, what you look at is that they're an audio hosting platform. They just also have a player that's attached to it, right? And then typically you can also, do it manually and have your own website. A lot of these podcast hosting sites, I'll give you a page to house all of your content, all of your video, right? Or your audio, it's like YouTube or something like that, right? And it gives you a page that allows it to be hosted so that people can go through and watch it or listen to it on their own. All right. So typically, your studio, you can have one of three ways, right? For me, I've had all three, but you can use your phone as a studio. There's different applications that allow you to do it for free, such as Anchor. All right, where you're a little bit more restrictive in how you can present it. You can use a content studio such as the lab at 301 North Main Street, at the OPIN Media Lab, or you could create your own home studio. Right, there's different things that that are required, for all three, to really be able to give you the best look and that best sound quality. All right, and the last part, and I'm only going to take a couple minutes and just introduce this, and we can take a couple more questions. But attention, basically covers rollouts and your introduction of micro content. So after you create your concept, what your topics and your themes are, and now you recorded your first episode or your first piece of content, you have to understand, like, how are you going to push it out to people, right? It does take, it's very front heavy, where you have to kind of take all these different parts to make sure that it's corrected and made. But now, you have to understand, like, how are you going to get it in front of people again, right? And just to kind of go back to what we said in the beginning, when you're marketing your business or your brand, it really does feel like, trying to get someone's attention on a crowded street. All right. And then when you have your rollout or, use micro content, this allows you to understand, how to, get your content in front of these people. So when you look at macro content creation, like, essentially there are three portions of this, right? So if you look at the 4 pieces that we talked about today, right, your plan and your rollout, right? If you notice, right, basically that covers the 12 rule and the formula, right? It's really in your plan and in your rollout, right? When you launch your flagship content, is what we call it, essentially is the top of the pyramid, right? Is the top of, what actually is being given. All right, that is more of the execution. And then now you see where you spend the most of your time is actually with the continuous flagship publishing and creating micro content. So what that means is that flagship content is what I normally tell our clients, essentially is up to an hour recording, right? Either audio or visual, right? And then now when you have your flagship content, essentially that is the main piece, so that's the most valuable piece of content that you have. Right now with micro content, what this strategy means is that now you take a piece of the larger chunk, right? And then now you take a piece of that, which can be a 15-second clip, 30-second clip, 60-second clip, even up to a 5-minute clip of an hour-long conversation. And now you present that in front of people where they most travel, right? With the intention to push them back to the larger piece, right? So let's say, for instance, that, with the portion that I mentioned earlier that said, hey, when you are, you etiquette when it comes to your content, you have to revolve around your camera or your microphone as if it's its moon, right? Basically, that portion right there can be considered micro content because I can strip it from the larger conversation over the last hour, and then now I can put that on Facebook, I can put that on Instagram, I can put that wherever content can be uploaded, right, with the intention to say, hey, you know what, if you want to learn more about why you need to be, the moon to your microphone, you can click this link here, right? And this is basically what the overall look is from like a 10,000, square foot view, right? So when you look at rolling out your content, right, essentially, again, the way I kind of like place this out based off how the rules look, if you look at it from a 30-day standpoint, right, a lot of these things kind of overlap, right? So, I honestly believe that you can create a concept and roll out your first episode within 30 days, right? And this is primarily with the understanding that, most of you guys are business owners, entrepreneurs, right? And that you have other things to do, right? Of course, if you were able to do it 100% full time, you might be able to get this done within 15 days, right? But you don't want to overload the potential customer or the potential client that you have, right? So, typically within the first 4 days, the 12 rule is usually kind of, worked out, right? When you develop your concept, you understand the who, what, when, where, why, and how, and you understand what is really going to drive them through to be able to provide the most value and then be able to create your introduction. Following that, this is when you now take the time out to create your format and to understand what your topics are, so you can start to sequence them and then be able to prioritize which ones are more important than the other. Right now, when you go from day 8 to 14, this is what I typically ask, my clients to create, what we say episode 0, right? So episode 0 is something that, even though if you say, hey, this is going to come out, June 29th or June 25th, my new episode, basically what I normally tell people is to have an episode 0 that can be used in order to help introduce what the bigger piece of content is before your actual release date. All right. And then day 15 to 30 is when you're actually rolling everything out and you're actually basically executing on the plan that you have. Right. And then you introduce micro content in order to push people. All right. So this really kind of looks at, that rollout cycle that we kind of covered here, where you have that initial meeting, you have, your record your intro mini-sode or that episode 0, right? And then you do your promo and press tour, right? So what that means to me is that basically you go to, other people who may have podcasts, may have vlogs, people that have spheres of influence that you can go to in order to, share your story with them in order to kind of, help you, kind of siphon off their audience to help you kind of generate something there. All right. So last piece here, I want to make sure that we can, wrap up. But right. So last piece is that typically when you have you're rolling out something in 30 days, what I tell people to do is create a top 10 countdown. Right. And what that means is that, if you, within day 15 to day 30, if you take 10 business days to create a top 10, that really kind of helps you go along with what your content is, right? That really kind of helps generate some buzz for what you're trying to push, so what people, can be a part of it. But what I want to do is, I know we have 3 minutes left. So again, I mentioned in the beginning is that, this was a, four-part series, right? That typically were 4 hours long that I try to condense down to an hour. And it was very, very hard. But, I want to thank you guys for taking the time out to come and, watch this morning. Again, my name is E.A. Green. My business is called the OPIN Media Lab. We're currently located at 301 North Main Street at the Winston Tower. And there will be some new announcements coming out within the next, coming weeks of some new moves and some new partnerships that we have going on. But I would love to be able to take any questions before we wrap up. Any questions?
Hey, it's Mona.
Hey, Mona.
Great content, and thank you for sharing your MBA. Appreciate it. So I know that you are doing consulting.
Yes.
So I'm going to reach out to you after this to talk about it. As you're aware, I wasn't comfortable in front of when we did the podcast. So that's the first thing I need to work on. And then I have some opportunities to speak. So I'm going to need some coaching. So this was great. This is very helpful.
Awesome. And Mona, I would be more than happy to, to help you out. Just, where to reach me. We'll make it happen.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Alan. I have a question as well.
Yeah. What's going on?
I'm glad.
I love your background, by the way.
Thank you. It's the beautiful old well at UNC Chapel Hill, and I would love to be there on a beautiful day like today. So the least I could do is be there virtually. One of my sisters attended one of the Hour of Empowerment or Marketing Outside the Box sessions that we have on Tuesdays and Wednesdays with Flywheel and Hustle and the entire entrepreneurial ecosystem. And she said to me, she said, "Oh wow, you should make a podcast out of that." And I said, "Well, let's talk about it. What do you think is involved in making a podcast out of it?" And she said, "I don't know, that's not my specialty, but I just know podcasts are very popular." And so we talked a little more, and here's my question. If something is done as a video, and I like how you said when you just take the video out, all you've got is the audio, and that's a podcast, right?
Yes.
So our videos are on the different sites, on Facebook. So is it possible that if somebody was walking or driving in their car, that they could just listen to the video and it be like a podcast?
So yes and no, right? So most social media platforms, they basically are way they make money is to keep you on the platform as long as possible, right? All right. So that's why when you ever have a YouTube video or a Facebook post, and whenever it gets popular, you might see it more often through their algorithm, right? So typically what they do, especially YouTube in particular, you have to pay in order for you to be able to play the video while your phone is locked, right? Right. And most times, right, like if you turn it off, it'll always cut off the audio and the visual for you, right? So typically it's not necessarily practical, right? Even though you can make it work, right? But how annoying is for you to, keep your phone on and unlocked in your pocket, right? Where, most of the audio platforms, like the audio hosting platforms, they allow you to embed the audio directly into an email or directly to your website or some form of that nature. And then it allows you to have your phone locked in your pocket, in your bag, in your purse, right, while still listening to it, right, or in your car, right? Because you definitely don't want to promote people keeping their phone on, right, to listen to a meeting, and they look down and then boom, now it's now it's the ecosystem's fault that they got into an accident. Right? So I mean, there is some training, per se, right, in terms of like saying, hey, like, but again, looking at it from the concept of, you trying to get someone's attention on a crowded street, it's more of like putting yourself in front of them where they're at versus trying to tell them, stop what you're doing and coming over here, right? So, once you introduce, say, hey, if while you're listening in your car or doing this, like, or, if you have your Alexa at home or your Google hotspot at home, like, you can wash the dishes and listen to this meeting that we just had. Like, there's all those different things. So it's more about just providing the most reach as possible versus just saying like one particular medium is better than the other.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for answering that question that I have had for so long of why, if I listen to a podcast while I'm out walking the dog, then I can continue listening. But I have some people I listen to who only post to YouTube. And so I have to walk with my phone like this, holding the dog's leash so that I can continue to listen. And I have never been able to figure out why that is, that I couldn't just put the phone in my pocket.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, YouTube has a premium subscription now where that allows you to then cut it, close your app and be able to still listen, but it's not really necessary, especially from like the end user, like it can be as little as $5 a month, depending on what host that you use, right? And as a business owner, it's a part of your budget, right? It's just a part of that marketing budget that you have, just to make sure that people have access to it where they're at versus you're being confined to one particular space.
Well, it is 9:34. Does anybody have a burning question? Or you can get in touch with Eric afterward and talk to him about some consulting, or ask him your question. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer it.
So my website is opinmedialab.com. Right, you can go there once you click the button right on the top, so let's get started. It'll take you to my scheduler, right, and you'll be able to book a schedule a meeting right then and there. Or if you want to reach out to me, it is at eagreen, so EAGREEN at opinmedialab.com, and I'll get that email as well. I'm sure Andrew will be more than happy to provide that information as well.
And we'll put this on YouTube as well, and have a slide at the beginning with your contact information as well, Eric.
All right, awesome.
Thanks so much. Can we, 2 quick plugs, and I'm going to put Alan Younger on the spot. The first one is that at Flywheel today, or outside at 500 West 5th Street, we are selling the Nightingale masks for $5 each. And just as a disclaimer, these are for purchase rather than giveaway for those who can afford to do so, to help fund the Mask the City project, to help further fund it so that we can continue to give them away to the folks who need them. So it is a little bit of a fundraiser, if you will. If you have a small business and you want to provide masks for your employees or just buy some as gifts for friends, then this is a really great way to do that. So I'll be out there from noon to 4 along with some volunteers doing that. If you would spread the word, that would be great. And Alan, I'll put you on the spot to plug next Tuesday's Hour of Empowerment.
Let me plug something even bigger than that includes the Hour of Empowerment.
Yes, true.
By the way, let me ask you first, is the Mask the City project, are you going to be selling masks at all next week? If so, you don't have to answer that really right now, but if so, I would love to add that to the official calendar of North Carolina Small Business Week.
Okay.
So next week is North Carolina Small Business Week. Every day is something special. On Monday, get ready for a special announcement. It'll be announced on social media. On Tuesday, one of the several events will be Hour of Empowerment at 1 o'clock. Our guest will be Jason Thiel, who's the president of the Downtown Winston-Salem Partnership. The topic of discussion will be reopening. There's a lot involved in reopening. So, and Jason is very involved in helping businesses to be prepared to reopen, whether they've already opened or they're getting ready to open. And specifically, he's going to talk about retail businesses as well. So we hope that you can join us for that discussion. And the full calendar of events is online, on Facebook in particular. If you go to Small Business Center at Forsyth Tech, or you go to Alan Younger in Facebook, and we have posts out there. And as a matter of fact, I just made an update to a couple updates to the official calendar, so I'll be making a post later today. So thank you, Andrea, for giving me an opportunity to run my mouth just a little bit more.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for doing that. Okay, thank you, Eric, very much. Hope some
problem.
folks will reach out to you for more information. Encourage you to step outside in this beautiful weather and process everything you've heard and learned today. We are 8 minutes into your next hour of business, and so we'll let you go and get on with your day and be productive and have a great one. Thanks again, Eric.
Thanks,
Thank you guys for
everybody.
having me.
Thanks, Eric.
Great job, Eric.
Bye.
Yay.
Nice to see you.